And we really appreciate everyone being here. Thanks.
All right.
Juan Williams.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. Mrs. Kemp, good to see you. It's a pleasure to finally get going now that all the preliminaries are done. This is the third and most important panel. And of course, as you just heard Jimmy say, the title is Freedom, Dignity, Opportunity. Let me introduce our panelists. Arthur Brooks is the president of AEI. He's taught at Syracuse, is the author of 8 books on the economics of arts to applied math. One of his books, the 2010 book, The Battle, How the Fight Between Free Enterprise and Big Government Will Shape America's Future. He's got an upcoming book called The Road to Freedom. Before working on public policy issues, he was for 12 years a professional French horn player with the City Orchestra of Barcelona. Arthur Brooks. Our next panelist is Ron Christie. He's the CEO of Christie Strategies, LLC, former assistant to President George W. Bush, deputy assistant to Vice President Cheney. Mr. Christie is the author of 3 books, most recently Blackwards, How Black Leadership is Returning America to the Days of Separate but Equal. Mr. Christie has also served as Director of Global Affairs and of Counsel at Patton Boggs, and of course he worked for Senator George Allen and had been an advisor to former House Budget Chair and now Governor of Ohio, John Kasich. And our third panelist is Wayne Frederick. He's the interim president of Howard University. He's a surgeon. He was on the faculty of the University of Connecticut and associate director of its cancer center. He's something of a prodigy. He went to Howard at 16, got his medical degree at 22, did his postdoctoral research and fellowship in surgical oncology at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. He's been rated by the Washington Post as a super doctor and one of America's best physicians by Black Enterprise. So please help me in welcoming this astounding panel. What I plan to do, with Jimmy's permission, is talk briefly to each of these panelists separately for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then open up the discussion to a conversation for another 40 minutes or so, and then open it up to all of you before we get to Mort. All right, so here we go. Now, as Jimmy mentioned, we're just a short distance from Howard University. Jack Kemp served on the board there. And we know that that university was established right after, given that we're in the Lincoln Cottage, the Civil War, to educate black people, free slaves. And Jack Kemp had a strong belief, and I think it's just so much at the heart of, Lincoln Republican ideals, believe that democratic capitalism is the basis. It has, in order for it to work, it has to work for everyone, for America to really succeed. And that leads me to this point. Today, we have a large political question in our country about income inequality, about persistent poverty, especially since the 2008 recession. Arguments, as Jimmy was saying, about taxes, stimulus, minimum wage to this very moment in terms of the political discourse. This weekend, I might add, we're going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. And of course, that was the start of the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement. And I think a trigger behind Brown, of course, is that education is the key to economic mobility going forward. So that mobility issue is now critical, especially in these difficult economic environment, and critical for the Republican Party as it tries to form its identity in this moment. What we've seen recently is a number of prominent Republicans who may run for president try to establish their beachhead on this issue. Paul Ryan, in fact, has looked at Jack Kemp's thinking on empowerment zones. Marco Rubio has been talking about replacing the earned income tax credit with direct grants to individuals who may decide that they want job training or they want further education. Rand Paul has been talking about how you can lower taxes effectively to allow people, again, more opportunity to get going in terms of economic motion, economic advancement. So, and I might add, just as an afterthought here, we've seen Rick Santorum, Mitt Romney, former Governor Pawlenty all come out recently and say they are in favor of raising the minimum wage because they think that the Republican Party has somehow become divorced from blue-collar workers. Speaker Boehner says he'll commit suicide before he allows any such thing to happen. A split within the party. So given this, the importance, the centrality of this issue of upward mobility, opportunity to the Republican brand, I wanted to start by asking Mr. Frederick, our educator, about something that I heard from the Democrats, which was the Democrat argument is, oh, all these prominent Republicans are now deigning to talk about poverty, but in reality what they're saying is they want to cut spending on anti-poverty programs in order to lower taxes on the rich. And they complain about entitlement societies and therefore are insincere when they address poverty issues. How do you deal with that?
Well, first let me thank Mrs. Kemp and Jimmy for having me here. As you pointed out, Jack Kemp was on our board of trustees and certainly was a stalwart for our university, so I certainly owe the Kemps a deep gratitude. It's obviously a complex issue. We at Howard University, just to correct one thing that you said in the beginning, our charter, which was signed on March 2nd, 1867, never mentioned race or ethnicity. Our Freedmen's Hospital, which predated the university by 5 years, did have a charter that mentioned race and ethnicity. The university's charter just mentioned opportunity. And I think that's key, because one of the things that we try to espouse at Howard for our students is that despite where they come from in society and despite what level they come from, the education is what they're coming to Howard to get, not a degree. And that is for an opportunity for that upward mobility. And I think if you go back to the 50s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, when the states in the South were actually paying their citizens, their African-American citizens, to go to school at Howard if they had the aptitude, because the schools were segregated, that upward mobility, you could palpably see it in the African-American community and the middle class of African-America when you look at a lot of the prominent folks that came out at that time, and then into the 70s, Thurgood Marshall, Vernon Jordans of the world, etc. That opportunity at Howard gave them that good opportunity to get in and do that. Today, obviously, it's a different circumstance, but with a lot of similar issues. We are a private institution. 56% of our students on our undergrad campus are Pell Grant eligible. So they are still coming from a circumstance in which some of them are the first time in college. Their parents don't necessarily have an opportunity to pay for them, and the maximum Pell Grant award is just about $5,800. So for a private school tuition of $24,000, there's still a significant gap. We match every Pell Grant award, we match it dollar for dollar. Even matching it dollar for the student who has basically a family contribution to their education of zero, still leaves you with a big gap. So that opportunity for that mobility, we think, is one that we must provide through education. We think, without a doubt, opportunity is one of America's greatest promises. Education, I think, is the ink with which that contract was written, and Howard has to provide that inkwell. And the way we try to provide that inkwell is to make sure that students recognize that it's not just about getting a degree, number one. Number two, that they have to use their education in a way that will put that degree on a wall, but then they've got to go out and change the world around them. So giving back, our motto is truth and service. That service component is very important. So we weave that into our educational process as well, because part of that mobility has to be that you reach back and afford others the opportunity. With respect to the complex issue of taxes and how you balance the two, I think unfortunately today we couple a lot of those things. If you lower taxes for the rich, then you've got to take that and put it into entitlement programs. I'm not sure that equation is such a linear equation. And I'm not sure that those issues should always be coupled. We have to keep creating the opportunities, but we have to underline those opportunities with excellence. So there must be no compromise. We make a lot of noise today, too, about affirmative action along this issue of opportunity and tying it to economics. But the reality is schools like University of Michigan had 4 African-American graduates from their medical school back in the 40s without anybody enacting a law to afford that opportunity. But excellence in terms of performance is what dictated that. And I think if we focus more on those things, we get a better opportunity. And I think in closing, you know, to tie all of it back, when I look at job placement out of college, that's a big issue that we have to make sure we connect with. We graduated our largest PhD class ever of 105 students this past Saturday. And my concern is always that I will get a call in 18 months from half of those students who will tell me that they're not working in related fields. That is an issue. So we can't push education as an opportunity, but then don't have a job creation circumstance that allows what we're pushing to have a distinct outcome that comes back to the contribution of a productive society. And that's a big concern. So and right now in our country, we have a lot of students with doctorate degrees who are unemployed or who can't find employment in their fields of study. And that's a major concern as well. So we need to look at what we're putting into the pipeline and make sure that there's an outlet for them to go out and express all the talents that we give them in our higher education system.
In the earlier panel, you heard discussion about problems in terms of immigration, keeping out very talented, smart people. But here you are saying, oh no, we've got educated people who, despite their level of academic achievement, can't find a place in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, and that's difficult. Now, I'm a little bit of an oxymoron on this topic because I came here 26 years ago as a 16-year-old to pursue my dream of becoming a physician, and Howard provided that. I was born in Trinidad, and therefore I came here as an immigrant to do that. But again, I think the way the laws were set up and the way the opportunity was defined, to me, I had an opportunity to provide in an excellent circumstance within the laws to provide that mobility, and the education system did that. The laws of the country afforded me that opportunity. The juxtaposition here with respect to what we're doing in our education system is still the fact that on the outcome end, we have to make sure we're creating the right job opportunities, and that still is not the circumstance. Plus, I think if we strengthen what American citizens are doing in our higher education system as far as getting from point A to point B in terms of the talent acquisition and the ability to apply those talents, we can become more competitive. But we have to make our education system more competitive to make sure that they can compete.
Ron Christie, I hear complaints about a Democrat, President Obama, coming from some quarters in the black community saying he's not doing enough on this poverty, unemployment issue with specific attention to people who've been left behind, people who've been hurt most. Persistent high levels of poverty, persistent high levels of unemployment. What would you say? What do you think the Republican Party is saying to that population as compared to what the Democrat in the White House is doing?
Well, Juan, thank you for the question, and I again want to echo my colleagues. Jimmy, thank you for the opportunity to allow us to be here, and Mrs. Kemp, it really means a lot to me for someone who had the opportunity to learn so much from Jack Kemp and his vision of the world, of looking at people not seeing color, but seeing people. And to answer your question, Juan, I'm going to start by quoting one Jack Kemp, because I think he had such a prescient answer back in 1985 that is as good and solid and relevant now as it was when he spoke to CPAC on February 25th, 1985. And this is what he said. He said, "There's only one explanation for why the party of Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and Coolidge, the party that Lincoln himself called eminently conservative, lost the support of black Americans. We Republicans mislaid the key to prosperity and full economic opportunity for all." And Kemp continued on this very important point by saying, on issue after issue, minority Americans share the goal of conservatives hold. It's high time that conservatives put forth an inclusive agenda that articulates the vision we stand for. Our task is to carry that vision to every district and every group of Americans. And what minorities are wanting to hear, Kemp continues, from conservatives is not that we have 15 new spending programs to replace failed liberal ones. Instead, they are waiting for conservatives to invite them to share our dream of freedom, equality, and opportunity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is, I think, why we're all here. And Juan, I think that is what really the Republicans need to do a better job of articulating. It's about freedom, it's about opportunity, and it's about dignity. The story that I would give you, there are two things that come to mind for me. Number one, when I first started as a freshly minted person on Capitol Hill back in 1991, I had the opportunity to serve as a committee aide to Craig James, who was a member from Florida. And I walked in the committee room and sat behind my boss, as staff do. And Maxine Waters was sitting there staring at me, and I thought, great, I'm a Californian, she's a Californian, she's staring at me, I'm going to get a chance to meet her. And the meeting was gavelled into order, and she said, Mr. Chairman, a point of order. Sonny Montgomery, the distinguished chairman back then, a gentlelady from California, and she said, I want to know why the only person of color, an African American, is him. And everybody looked at me, and because I think they're talking about me. And came back to the office afterwards. I thought I was going to get fired on my first day. And the phone rang, and they said, it's Maxine Waters on the phone. I was like, yeah, right. So she said, young man, this is Maxine Waters. I want you to come downstairs. And so I went running down to her office in Longworth, and she said, what's wrong with you? You're an African American. You're a traitor to your race. You're a sellout. You're an Uncle Tom. Black people aren't Republicans. We're Democrats. And so I think what we as a party stand for, it's about the liberating thoughts of economic opportunity, of recognizing the power of an individual, recognizing the ability that we should have a discourse with dignity and agree to disagree. But perhaps, Juan, most importantly, is that we're not going to take people for granted, and we recognize that education really is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And without Republicans making that approach, making that appeal, and having that message of talking about what we're for and why you would be mistaken not to be part of the conservative movement, I think is an opportunity missed for us.
And you don't think that that message is being delivered by the party, or do you think it's being intentionally obstructed? What's the disconnect?
Well, I think there are two things at play here. One, I think Republicans, and this is why I so admired Jack Kemp. Jack Kemp never talked to black people like black people. He talked to people like people. And there were so many folks in my time on the Hill would say, oh, we have to have an African-American outreach. Let's see. Let's talk about crime. Let's talk about drugs. Let's talk about housing reform. No. Let's talk about lowering taxes. Let's talk about national security issues. Let's talk about issues that Americans care about. And the second thing, and it's my second book that Juan was gracious enough to write the blurb on the back of, it's called Acting White, The Curious History of a Racial Slur. And there's so many African Americans in this country today who say, if you study hard and you work hard and you're black, you're not authentically black, you're actually acting white. And I think it's a dual message, Juan, of one, conservatives need to articulate why we're for what we're for, and two, I think blacks need to have a little bit more of a dignified discussion and say to those who they don't necessarily agree with, well then somehow you're acting white and you're not authentically black.
Ron, thank you. Arthur Brooks, let me come to the title of your 2010 book, The Battle. The fight between free enterprise and big government will shape the future. So, for the purposes of this panel, where do the poor fit in that fight?
Well, to begin with, as everybody else said, I'm going to reiterate, it's a real honor to be here. I lead an institution, the American Enterprise Institute, that's built on the ideals that Jack Kemp stood for and that Joanne and Jimmy are continuing to keep alive. So thank you so much for inviting me and by extension my whole institution here. Free enterprise and the poor. That's, Jack talked an awful lot about that. But why do the poor matter in the context of free enterprise? Free enterprise matters because of the poor. The truth of the matter is, if you don't talk about the poor, free enterprise doesn't even matter. The Catholic Cardinal of Chicago, Francis George, one time he was talking to a large group of donors, his biggest donors, millionaires giving tons of money to the church. And he said, and he was gathering a lot of money for causes to help people in poverty. And he said, the poor need you, but you need the poor too. He said, and you know why? Because the poor are going to keep you out of hell. Now so, so you know what? Capitalism needs the poor. Capitalism, to be relevant, needs the poor. Rich people don't need free enterprise very much. because rich people have the system pretty wired. You know, in modern America today, if you've got kind of everything in a row, and you know you have your powerful friends in government, you don't need free enterprise that much. The people who need opportunity are the ones that need the warriors who believe in the free enterprise system. That's what it's all about. Now, look at just a minute of history. Think of what's happened in our adult lifetimes. Juan, when you and I were kids, poverty was something that was really far away and was particularly sub-Saharan African poverty, the kind of poverty of National Geographic, right? And there was nothing we could do. And it was an insoluble problem. Nothing was ever going to happen. Well, think about the difference between then and now. Today, compared to 1970, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less has declined by 80%. About 70% of Americans think that hunger is up around the world. They're wrong. 80% decline in starvation level poverty since 1970. Why? Why? You know, if I talk to my friends who work for the government, which is a lot of my friends, some of my best friends are bureaucrats. They'll say it's, you know, the United Nations or U.S. foreign aid or, you know, and good or bad, like them or hate them, but that's actually not the reason. There are 5 explanations, actually 6. 5 explanations with a 6th added on. Globalization, free trade, property rights, rule of law, and entrepreneurship. And add on to that the strength of the American military that has kept peace in places that have never seen it around the world, facilitated trade. That's what has cut starvation level poverty by 80%. That's what did it. You did it, and you didn't even know it. That was the free enterprise system at work. It was the American free enterprise system spreading itself around the world because the modes of communication changed. The explosion of ways that people could get information meant that people around the world threw off the chains of their poverty and the chains of their tyranny so they could live like us. That's a miracle. That's the greatest miracle, anti-poverty achievement in the history of mankind that happened in the last few decades, and you built that. What an extraordinary achievement. What a miracle. That's why free enterprise matters. It matters so that we can continue to do that around the world and right here. And if it doesn't do that, and if we don't talk about that, and if we're not warriors for the poor every single day, then free enterprise simply has no moral content and it doesn't matter.
I love that. That was inspiring. That's great. But I must say...
Thanks, but...
Yeah, wait for it.
No, so just bring it home. You know, okay, it had this tremendous impact. I think what you said was so true around the globe. But then we see here, especially among minority children, just despairing levels of persistent poverty. And young people, again, you know, I'm focusing heavily on the minority population, but don't think that I am unaware. You know, this is
of rural white poverty, et cetera.
not
Yeah,
rural,
right.
suburban white
Right.
poverty, urban white. But I mean, there's a lot of white poverty. But given the nature of the panel, I just wanted to focus in on the fact that there's this disproportionate poverty in the Black, Hispanic populations here at home, and particularly among these children. So how do these 5, you know, we have police forces in place of your 6th, the military, but how do these 5 principles apply here, and how could the Republican brand harness them to speak to that population and say, we sincerely care about your issues and making certain that you believe in upward mobility and the power of capitalism?
So that's a great question, and let me talk about it from the perspective of conservative politics, okay? And why? Because I hang out with a lot of Republicans, and we talk about this all the time. And the Republicans...
Bureaucrats are all Republicans?
Well, let's just say that my friend groups don't meet very much. So,
See how you roll.
so now what's the problem? The problem is for conservatives who have a relatively high level of difficulty in penetrating communities that actually need the principles of free enterprise, that could benefit the most from the principles of free enterprise. Why is that? And the answer is because, face facts, people don't think that conservatives care. They think conservatives don't care about the poor. You've seen the data. 16% of Americans think that conservatives care about the poor. 16%. You can't win when people think that nobody's ever going to vote for you or support you or even be remotely sympathetic to you if they don't think you care about people like them. That was, as you know, the only stat you need to know in the 2012 election. Who cares more about people like you? And before you dismiss it, because it sounds unduly emotional, well, you know what? I'm not going to vote for anybody who doesn't care about people like me either. I'm not. I won't, and I don't think I should have to. You know, the truth of the matter is that there are lots and lots of historical reasons, but the biggest reason that people, particularly people who are poor, think that Republicans, conservatives don't care about people like them is because they've talked as if they don't. What is the Republican brand? The Republican brand is fighting against things, and it has been for a long time. You think about it, you could say, what was, let's go back to the time of St. Ronald Reagan. And so what was Ronald Reagan's product line? His product line was basically fighting against 5 things: the sprawling big government, regulation, taxes, deficits, and debt. Okay? But that actually didn't matter, because a product line is ephemeral. A bunch of you run companies, and I run a company, and our product line changes from year to year, depending on the exigencies that the market gives us. What doesn't change over time is our purpose. And that's what matters. Purpose shouldn't change, and purpose comes before product. The purpose, the magic of Reagan. And I learned this as a kid. You know, I grew up in this liberal democratic household where everybody thought that Reagan was either, you know, like on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday he was evil, and on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday he was stupid. But nobody could make up their mind, right? And you know, I grew up in this family of artists and academics in Seattle, which is like the Soviet Union. So what did I learn about Reagan? I heard all these things, but I knew Reagan loved me. Reagan loved this country. Reagan loved the human. Jack Kemp, you know what his magic was? He loved people, and he believed in them. That's the secret. The Republicans have to stop fighting against things and have to start fighting for people. There's no issue that we cannot find where you can't torque it from being against things to being for people. Who are you fighting for, and how are you going to do it? So don't fight against teachers' unions. I mean, I understand that they do a lot of bad things. Fight for children. Don't fight against a licentious culture. Fight for the good life that comes from faith, family, community, and work. Not because you're a Puritan, but because you're a good Samaritan. There's a way to do it, and there's a way not to do it. The Republicans have lost their way because they're fighters against things, and it's time for them to be warriors for people. It's time for them, and frankly, I think for all of us, to examine our conscience and ask and honestly answer this question: did all of my work today go for the benefit of people with less power than me? And if the answer is yes, then that's a fight worth having, and it's a fight we can win.
Fabulous. All right, well, let's now shift into the conversational mode, because I think that what you're saying speaks to the idea Republicans should reach out and reach out with a message that's positive, rather than saying, oh, we don't like the 47%, or there's a bunch of, this is an entitlement society that's being spread. Talk about opportunity, right? So how would you talk about opportunity to I imagine what is a thoroughly Democratic campus over there that thinks Republicans are representing the rich and the corporate and have no caring about them, and the fact that their Pell Grants are still going to leave them with huge student debt once they get out of school and may not get a job?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good question. I'm not sure the characterization of my campus is quite quite as you described it. But there are some.
I'm fair and balanced, brother.
So with that in mind,
let's not go too far with this.
No. So with that in mind, we'll keep it fair. I don't know about balance, but we'll keep it fair. Rand Paul came to our campus to talk to our students as part of the Republican outreach, as an example. And I made some interesting observations. The first thing is, when we say talk, we have to be careful about when we say talk to, because I really think that the discourse and dissent that needs to take place needs to be a dialogue. There has to be as much listening, I think, if you're going to achieve more participation, as you do talking to. So he came to our campus. There was no talk, as you would say. Didn't meet with the president, the provost, any university officials. Showed up on campus, got in front of a bunch of students that he probably automatically assumed would be hostile because he felt it would be a liberal campus, and they got up and I think represented us extremely well. Mr. Senator, you voted such and such. Why? Can you explain? He misquoted who the first black U.S. Senator was and a few things like that. They forgave him for that. They corrected him out loud. But my point is, if you're going to do something like that, then I think you have to do it in a way that embraces that type of a dialogue. You have to set up a system in which you've done some homework, you're willing to get feedback about what it is people want. We make assumptions about what those kids on that campus want. I'm not sure that those kids on that campus are all liberal Democrats, to be quite honest. But there's no one providing them an opportunity to look for any conservative type of leaning, et cetera, because no one is approaching them from that point of view. Even a senator who's interested in running for president comes to a campus without that groundwork. The second thing I'll tell you is most university campuses today, I think, unfortunately, are not as open-minded for that dissent and discourse. If you just look at this commencement season, the number of people who have been declined to speak or had to be disinvited speaks to that. That's unfortunate. We are now on college campuses where if you have a point of view that's too conservative or too liberal, we don't want you on our campus. I think that's wrong. And then the third thing I would say, again, getting back to that setting and my observation just in that setting again, the opportunity to talk to students on my campus, I think, was lost from this point of view as well. When we get an invitation for someone who wants to speak, my tendency is to look for a group who can host them. Because that opportunity to set up a smaller group, for that group to really publicize it, it has a totally different feeling than the senator is coming to speak, as opposed to a group has invited him. And unfortunately, we don't have a Republican group on our campus. Nobody in the Republican Party, even after Senator Paul came to my campus, reached out to me. I was then the provost and said, Dr. Frederick, is there something that we can do to get a Republican presence on this campus? It's a missed opportunity. We, in my opinion, we're the flagship HBCU enterprise in this country. And to not try to put your flagpole within the students, not coming from Senator Paul, et cetera. Just imagine that discourse at the cafeteria table, where you can have somebody with a difference of opinion, having a discussion with you, same backgrounds, but having a discussion just about ideology. That's a different conversation as opposed to somebody showing up and trying to talk.
You believe the students are open to this, and Senator Paul was not run out, he was not belittled by the student body.
Absolutely not. And I the C-SPAN tape, the entire thing, I would encourage you to watch it. I had freshman students get up and ask him questions that I am telling you, I was absolutely impressed.
Tell me one thing that stays with you from it. I mean, what was the key point that they made to this prominent Republican senator?
They were asking him for explanations as to why he would vote against things that would give them opportunity
like
in
what?
their eyes. I mean, they meant, I can't recall specific things, but I think the theme of their questioning was, to your point, was that he seemed to be against things. And their question was, if that's the case, give us an explanation as to why we should come join you, because what is the opportunity you would create for us? And I don't think that he was able to articulate what the opportunity is, especially for kids who do not come from a system where their parents may have owned small businesses or were in the higher echelons of corporate America, et cetera. You've got to be able to speak to these kids whose parents are public servants and explain to them how now that they are in college, they now have an opportunity when they leave here because of free enterprise and opportunity that a Republican Party may create, they would then have an opportunity.
This was your point, Arthur.
And that was exactly, that was his point. I think that opportunity for that dialogue was there and it was missed.
You know, what's interesting is that Senator Paul has, in recent days, said Republicans should get off this idea of the voter ID. He says it's antagonizing black people all over the country.
So the students brought that up with him as well. It was close to that past election cycle. They brought it up. They brought the Voting Rights Act up. All of those things that he did not have a firm position to show them that they would get from point A to point B. They are not living the same struggle as the civil rights era.
Ron, Arthur, jump in here. I mean, what do you say if somebody says to you, if you're on the student, you're speaking, and say, well, Republicans want to limit turnout of blacks. You say you have a great message about opportunity, but gosh, I notice that when it comes to inclusion, you're not really trying to encourage black people to join the political process.
Well, you have to be ready. I mean, if you have a principled position on something like that, you have to be able to articulate the principled position. I mean, on any of these really hot issues, where people, it's where they're proxy for a lot of other history. I mean, you get into the social issues, and particularly in New York City with women, and you can be talking about one issue, but you're really talking by proxy about a lot of other issues too. These are hard things to navigate. One way is that politicians try to do all the time is they just try to avoid these issues. They pivot off to whatever else they want to talk about. But the truth of the matter is, one of the reasons that Republicans do so poorly in these cases is not because they have the wrong position. It's because to be successful in things where reasonable people can disagree is you have to have two characteristics. You have to be principled and tolerant. Those are the two things you have to have. Now, the problem is that a lot of Republicans look unprincipled and intolerant. In other words, you know, I go this way on abortion, and then that way on abortion, and then this way, and then that way. But I do know that whatever position I'm taking today, I hate everybody else. I mean, that's become the Republican way, and it's a real problem. I have observed, I'm not a politician, thank God. I have observed, however, that among politicians, you can go into a community that disagrees with a lot of your policies. If you're tolerant, you're interested in what other people have to say, you entertain opposing points of view in a reasonable way, and you're highly principled about your point of view, people will listen. It'll be okay. That turns out to be, as far as I'm concerned, that's the right approach.
And that's what's missing.
That's missing a lot.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You know, one of the things that was one of the greatest thrills I've ever had the chance to do was to serve as a resident fellow at Harvard University's Institute of Politics. And you know, you get to teach a study group, all this. No, the best part for me was getting the invitation, Juan, to be invited by the Harvard Black Men's Forum to come in and to engage with this group. And the really neat thing for me about this is that most people in this town, when people are talking and you're having a conversation in Washington, of course, you'd think that they're listening, but in Washington, they're waiting to talk rather than listening. And I thought, I'm going to go with an open mind, and I'm going to listen, and I want to hear what these students have to say, who are a group who started off by saying, for example, you had 94% of African Americans who voted for President Obama. How come you didn't vote for him? I said, well, I didn't agree based on his stance on spending, taxes, et cetera. But it's not due to his color, it's due to what I think he's standing for. And I said, wouldn't you suggest that if 94% of white people voted for Republicans, then therefore wouldn't that equally be racist? And people are like, huh, you know, I didn't really think of it that way. And having the opportunity to have the discussion, as you pointed out, about voter IDs. Republicans are racist, they're trying to suppress the vote. Well, to have the opportunity to sit with these students and say, well, do you realize that after the Supreme Court ruled in 2008 that it was legal to do such a thing, that in Indiana and Georgia, which had the two most restrictive voter ID laws in the books, that African American participation in the voter rolls increased rather than decreased. And so I think Republicans, and your point is absolutely the right one, of we come across as intolerant, we come across of here's my position and you know the heck with you and the rest of it, of we got to do a better job of listening to people who aren't used to hearing us talk and pivoting off of that one and saying, I am going to reflect on what you've said and I'm going to come back. Because Republicans make the mistake of parachuting in like right around election time and saying how inclusive they are and how important it is that we're all together, and they disappear for another 4 years. You look at what Paul Ryan has been doing for the last year of going to 12 different cities, talking to 12 different communities, primarily faith-based institutions, but he's on a listening tour, and it would behoove the conservative movement and our party to listen as opposed to talk, to listen as opposed to waiting to talk, and to then have a dialogue and follow up with it.
Let me just piggyback on one thing you said. I have a 9- and 7-year-old. The two of them the next time they see a white man in the White House will be the first time that they can fully grasp that there's a white male president, right? So with that in mind, I was looking at CNN.
Might never happen again.
Well, I'm going to leave that alone. But I was looking at CNN one day, and my son, turned to me and said, "Why did the president mess up the economy?" And I said, "What do you mean he messed up the economy?" And he engaged me at the time. This was probably 4 years ago. He engaged me in a dialogue about the fact that President Obama messed up the economy. As far as he's concerned, there's a president of the country, and that president needs to do a good job for him and the rest of the country. The fact that Mr. Obama was black didn't give him a free pass. And that is the new society we will live in as a result of the presidency, whether you like it or not. And so when you look at minorities in terms of bringing them in, especially the younger minorities, I think most of them look at it from that perspective. They now see somebody who has functioned in that role, whether you think he's done a good job or not, and their evaluation of it is that I now have some connection to that based on performance. So the opportunity to listen to them in terms of their needs. People on a college campus are highly educated, highly capable of listening to complex ideas, et cetera, and to be able to bring those, as you said, break them down for him or for her, and to have that person participate in a dialogue is one that you cannot miss. It's a missed opportunity if you ignore the fact that you can mold those minds or even convince them of a different way of doing things. But it has to begin with having that dialogue at their level and not speaking to them, as you say, about principled positions and being intolerant of it. You have to see where the edges are and bring them to that. But no one is doing that on my campus. Nobody is coming and saying, let me engage you in a dialogue. Although you may be starting from a position of disagreement, let me bring you at least a little way closer to me.
One last question before we go to the audience, which has to do with the economics of this. When it comes to the economics of public policy, of trying to say there is uplift, there is opportunity available as a result of Republican policies, what would you be saying? As I mentioned, we have prominent Republicans who are saying lower taxes, empowerment zones in the Kemp tradition. There's much discussion about earned income tax credits as opposed to outright grants. What is the policy that any one of the three of you would say, you know, that's what Republicans should be saying. That will be effective. That will cut through the static and get some people who are currently indifferent to the Republican message to respond.
You want me to start?
Sure.
The Republican message, and for that matter, everybody's message, as far as I'm concerned, really has to be multi-part. It has to look at the safety net, has to look at the short run, which is to say to stop the bleeding, has to look at the medium term, what we can do in the next 3 to 5 years, and it has to look at where we want to be in the next 10 years. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 parts. Number one, the conservatives in general, but all of us need to declare peace right now on the safety net. The safety net, the social safety net provided by the government is one of the greatest achievements of our society. It is the singular thing that free enterprise has been able to help us to accomplish, that no other economic system in the history of mankind has ever brought to the United States. But that requires that we declare war on policies that are going to bankrupt the safety net for the truly indigent, elderly, and those with disabilities. For example, the reason that entitlement reform matters, it's the wonkiest, most boring policy topic ever, right? Why is it important? Because as an empirical matter, societies that have not gotten their entitlements under control have become insolvent, and I'm talking about the periphery nations in Europe in particular. That has led to austerity, and austerity always and everywhere affects the poor and not the rich. If you care about poor people, you must declare war on out-of-control entitlements. In other words, to be for the poor, you better be a rock-ribbed fiscal conservative. Yeah. There is no 2 ways about it. There's no other way to get out of this conundrum. And that's how you protect the safety net, and the safety net's important. Number one, short term, what do you do to stop the bleeding? You have to be a jobs hedgehog. You have to be able to do one thing well, and that's to be a warrior for jobs. You have to have an energy policy that brings jobs. You have to have a regulatory policy that brings jobs. And all of this kind there, we could list, you could have tax reform policy, corporate tax reform in particular, and on and on and on. Why? Because jobs are the source of meaning and dignity in people's lives. Mm-hmm. You're one of 2 people. You either are a person who thinks that work is a punishment, or you're a person who thinks that work is a blessing. Everybody falls into one of those 2 categories, and those 2 categories cut across ideological boundaries. I know lots and lots of Republicans that want to punish the poor by making them work for their food stamps. And I know a lot of other Republicans that want to bless the poor by saying you need to work in order to get your food stamps. The truth of the matter is you're either one or the other. And if you believe that work is a blessing, which most Americans actually do on both left and right, then you need a jobs policy that blesses people and does not call anything dead end. there are no dead-end jobs. If I went around this room, most of you started with a dead-end job in some way, shape, or form. That's just the way it is. And then mirroring it with the safety net such that we have actually making work pay. So you have a social compact of the population saying if you work and play by the rules, you deserve to be able to make a living. That doesn't mean a minimum wage increase, which will saw off the most vulnerable jobs from the economy, but rather something like an EITC expansion, and there are a lot of other ways that we can do this. Medium term is human capital development. That's the reason education matters and is the civil rights struggle of our time. Because in the medium term, you need to be able to have education reform where school systems work for the benefit of children, not adults. I mean, think about this. I mean, if I ran my company for the benefit of the employees, as opposed to the benefit of the mission that we're trying to achieve, we would deserve to go out of business, and we would. And no other industry has that bridles against both choice and innovation and stays in business and grows. Yet that's our education establishment today. In the long term, you have to deal with culture. You have to talk about the issues of faith, family, community, and work, which are the most concentric forces to a life of happiness and prosperity. And those are the things that are escaping the poor more and more, are these elements of culture. And if we can't, those of us who are blessed can't preach what we practice and talk about the kind of culture that we want 10 and 20 years from now, shame on us. That's, as far as I'm concerned, the kind of shape of strategy that we need.
So just to reiterate, jobs, hedgehog for jobs.
Yeah.
That was the heart and soul of it. That gives dignity to people. People want jobs, and if they believe that you are out there fighting to help them get a job, they're with you, because you care about them.
The thing that Republicans often get most wrong when they talk about this is that they believe that people on welfare don't want to work. That's a very, very strong behavioral assumption that turns out to be empirically incorrect. The vast majority, and this comes from the data on public opinion data, people who are not working would much prefer to have their children see them earning a paycheck as opposed to getting a welfare check. That's the truth. And if you believe the best about people and give them opportunity, no. If you give them hope, then people will respond largely in a very constructive way. But if you assume the worst about them, then they will assume that you're hostile, they'll assume that you're racist, they'll assume you don't care about people like them, and to a certain extent, they won't be wrong.
Right. I think it's a certain value, and I agree, Arthur, with what you're saying about culture and education. You mentioned, Juan, that we're coming up on the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. I look at my parents who grew up in a segregated environment. I look at my grandparents who could only go to high school. And you look now in the District of Columbia, where I was listening to the radio driving up here today, DC spends more per capita per student than any other municipality or state, whatever you want to call it, in the country, but yet they rank 51st in achievement. And I think that there's a culture now that says that having the value of an education, it's somehow not cool, you're not authentic, you're not this. If you can't at least graduate high school and master the basics in science and mathematics and English, how are you going to get a job? How are you going to get a good paying job? And I think Republicans, when we talk about opportunity and empowerment, if you're coming out of the starting blocks and you don't even have that solid foundation, that building block of the education wall, I think that the game is over before you start. And so we need to do a much better job of explaining why our vision of empowering people, parents to take kids from failing schools, why that matters, how that's important, what that will mean for their children's future if they're stuck in a failing school or if they're allowed to escape. And then secondarily, again, we have to have the safety net in place, and we have to ensure that students who are on Pell Grants, who are receiving federal assistance, maintain the benefit of that safety net without looking cruel and without looking like we don't care. But if you don't have that basic foundation, that bedrock, it's over before you start.
So you would agree it's about education and jobs, but you want to promote that education element. That's your primary focus.
But yes, within the paradigm, Juan, that we have to change our culture of what our parents and our grandparents endured and went through with integration, with rocks, with batons, with water cannons, that now kids today can scroll into school and say, yeah, I don't care, I'm not interested. No, we need to honor that legacy of what the opportunity that we have been given, those of us who are younger have been given, and to build on that.
All right, let me open this to I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, again, I think to borrow from both of my fellow panelists, education and entrepreneurship are the two that I would like to see us focus on. On my campus, one of the concerns my students have about jobs is that they don't necessarily want to go work in a traditional circumstance for corporate America. They want to create their own opportunity in terms of their own jobs, their own type of market, et cetera, that they see. And I think that's one of the things that we have to put forward in terms of ideas. Along the education side, there's a chartered middle school on Howard's campus focused on math and science. We enter the lottery, we take kids that typically perform a grade below level. And that first graduating class, from that cohort, 95% of them went to college. 50% of them in the STEM fields. These are kids who are performing below. And so being on a college campus, we think is one thing that obviously did it. Being in a focused environment among math and science. The laptops we gave them are probably the first computers in their homes. We brought the parents in to teach them how to use the laptop. So the fact that you can create an opportunity, the very same kids that are performing at the 51st, bringing them into an environment that's focused, that we show them that we care and that they have the opportunity to empower them. And those are some of the things that we're looking for to hear in terms of opportunities that we can then really not just get a level playing field. I think there's a great cartoon that demonstrates this. 3 people looking over a fence at a baseball game. One is particularly short, medium height, and one can see over the fence. Equality is giving each of them the same size box to look over. If the box is too short, the shortest person never sees over that fence. But justice is giving the shortest guy 2 boxes so he can see over the fence. The tall guy already can see over the fence, and the middle guy can see. And I think balancing the equality versus justice is part of what some of these policies have to demonstrate in order to bring these communities in, to your point, so that they don't feel that people are just being principled and intolerant, but people care about them. I think that has to be a big part of whatever the underlying theme is when these policies are put forward.
Okay. So now we go to the questions.
Bruce Chapman, Mr. Williams, I want to ask you a question, and I want to pose it in the context of the family. We talked a little bit, we talked a little bit about the family. But Jack Kemp was very interested in the family, and I know that because in the early years of the Reagan administration, after leaving the Census Bureau, I went to the White House and ran the family program. There were certain initiatives that were very positive about tax treatment of families, parents, children, the marriage penalty, and the treatment of foster children who were stuck in foster care and so on. You interviewed me. Actually, I met you before. I met you early on when you didn't know who I was, and you really railed against the Reagan administration. You railed against the Reagan administration so badly that I didn't want to talk to you when you called the interview. You called the interview. I said, I don't think I'll get a fair interview. We didn't have the interview. And then I've watched you over the years as you've gone through your career, and I've seen you do interesting changes, and I've seen you subjected to some political correctness issues. And it's made me wonder, how have you changed your views on these social issues and the economic issues that may have been, let's say, you don't think the same way, most of us don't, many of us don't, as we did 30 years ago. How would you say that has changed? I mean, here you are today leading this panel. What would you say may have changed in your mind and heart?
Gosh, I don't know where to begin. I mean, obviously, I think I'm better with interview subjects. I get my calls returned. You know, I think that if you look back over this period and you think about the establishment of the social safety net that we've been discussing here, what you've seen is an expansion of that social safety net over that period. I think strongly beginning, obviously, you know, this year being, everybody's talking about additions to the Great Society, the Johnson years. Nixon certainly added to that social safety net. And then you go into the Reagan years. And I don't know what the specific topic we were talking about was, but the question would be, how is it that your policies, to pick up on something Arthur was saying, evidence caring about people? Is that what you're saying, that you care about people, as opposed to, I think one of the least fortunate things that President Reagan did was to go after the welfare queen in the pink Cadillac, right? Which I think has become sort of this stigmatized idea that there's the undeserving poor person who really does not want to work, as opposed to somebody who finds themselves in an unfortunate situation and is looking for a way up, and focusing on that person as opposed to focusing on the person who doesn't want to work. And you know, you say, I see this guy standing on the corner, looks like a bum to me, and he's living off the government. that's a lament and it's a complaint, but I think there are far more people who are like the recent immigrants who you see gathered on that corner who are looking for a day work, any job, in order to get off that corner. So I think that from, if I was being a tough-ass reporter with you and coming at you, it was saying, hey, is the party really standing there talking about the welfare queen in the pink Cadillac, or are you standing there talking about helping people to find a way up that ladder of upward mobility? That would be the question. And I think that in terms of my thinking now, by the way, one of the things that has occurred for me in my life is understanding intolerance on the left can be far greater than the intolerance that would come from the Archie Bunker on the right, who would be pointing at the guys on the corner and saying, those guys are a bunch of bums and drug dealers, and I don't care about them. That in fact, there is such a lock in terms of the way the left thinks at times in saying, oh, you know, you have to simply spend more. The programs that exist now are, because they do lift some people up, they're good programs, without paying attention to the reality of persistent poverty, family breakdown, failure of the larger educational structure, and being open to real change to improve these failing systems. I'd say that, I think that's a change on my part. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
All right, yes.
Back in one of my early books in the 1980s, I said that if the inner city family broke down, the result would be the creation of a welfare state to take care of the women and children, and a police state to take care of the boys. And all this talk of liberal compassion totally breaks down when it comes to boys. A third of black young men are in jail or on the lam or on probation. And that's how we solve the crime problem. And it is an outrage. And it's not defensible. This isn't a defensible solution to put a third of the boys in jail and give all sorts of fancy subsidized jobs to the women. But this has really been liberalism at work. And I just wonder whether the problem of boys is what's the breakdown at Howard now?
Yeah.
Girls to boys.
Yeah, so in my undergrad campus, 70% of the undergrads are females, 30% are males. To your point.
70-30.
Yes, it's 70-30. So it's great for the boys,
That's
as you
a
can
great
imagine,
poll for
but
the
it's
boys,
not.
yeah. Holy cow. That's like,
However,
should advertise that.
a couple of things though, and I'm not sure it's liberalism going awry. In 2000, there were more black males in our penitentiary system than in our higher education system. That's not the case today. There are twice as many black males in our higher education system as in our penitentiary system. We've made a significant shift. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but the fact is it has happened and has brought us to this point where it has occurred. In two-year institutions, there are more black females than white males going into two-year institutions right now in our country. So in terms of education system, the pipeline is being primed well. There is still a difference in opportunity at the end of that. So when you look at two-year institutions and their output in terms of job placement, it is not great. And that's why I keep coming back to that opportunity in terms of how you create jobs, how you purposefully create policies that would allow these now educated young men and women to get into another system. One of the things that we are trying to do at Howard is to create not just an associate's degree to BS degree track, but an associate's degree to JD track, an associate's degree to MD track. These kids are bright. They're not going to two-year colleges because of academic aptitude. They're going there because of a lack of economic opportunity. They can't afford to go to a four-year institution off the bat. But if they go to a two-year institution and prove themselves, we should have a system that would allow them to get their PhD eventually, because they've demonstrated that. They've already gone through their filter post-GED. We're starting a dual enrollment program with Banneker High School and McKinley for the same purpose, to take kids in their junior year of high school and bring them into our college system, to say that this is the way. So I think in the next decade, when you talk about minorities and opportunity and education, I really think the pump is going to be well primed. The issue is, are we going to have an outlet in our country to get these people into systems that would allow them to participate and diversify our workforce? And I think that's where our policies are going to let us down if we don't do something about them.
By the way, before we let you go there, George, what is it that you would say about what the message should be, whether it's on boys or elsewhere in terms of what we were hearing from Arthur? What's the positive message from Republicans, from capitalists, to this issue of poverty?
That you stop building up government. Government causes poverty. It doesn't relieve poverty. It's the root of poverty is the steady plague of regulations and overreach by bureaucracies, restrictions on job opportunities, capture by guilds and licensing rules and credentialism and all these things that government is devoted to and which is hostile to blacks. Credentialism is destructive to boys and to blacks. It's all these mazes of rules that are spreading through the economy. And
You know, I worry though in hearing that it comes across again as negative, as more break it down. I understand your point, and I take it to heart. It's just that it comes across as attacking, and of course for lots of people who found safe haven with government coming out of slavery and the like, and rules that have promulgated, for example, civil rights.
Bacon,
But some of those,
minimum wages, all
that's your point, and I understand it. But I'm saying I think you have to be careful in delivering it as more of a positive message.
Yeah, but I have to say, I don't usually disagree often, but I have to say, especially on the cusp of celebrating Brown versus the Board of Education, we have to still recognize that opportunity, although it is a promise, it is not delivered on everybody's doorstep.
That's right.
And we
supported all those changes.
no, I understand that, but still, and I would encourage you to come on my campus and talk to these same black males that you're talking about. The reality is we still live in a country today that, and I tell my students this every day, if I were to dress like them and stand on the corner of Georgia and Florida and have each one of them drive by me, would they look at me and say, that guy is a surgeon and a college president? So we still live in a country like that. My very students who look like me would drive by and probably not pick those on a list of jobs that I do. So let's be honest. When we look at opportunity, we look at it through a certain prism that isn't always a clear prism. And so we have to be careful in terms of the role the government plays. I don't think it has to be sprawling to do it. But I do think, based on what I see in the young men and women who come to our campus from all over this nation and from 44 countries, that opportunity isn't being delivered on their doorstep. But when they get it, boy, they do some magical things with it. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that we deliver it on all their doorsteps.
Marguerite?
Yeah, I wanted to say that listening all day today, thinking of Kemp and Lincoln, I'm hungry for courage and boldness from our political leaders, and we don't see enough of that today. And the only courage and boldness we see is in service to partisan politics, and that's the sad thing. And I think there is a strong body of the populace that are hungry for courage and boldness, hungry for equal opportunity and income mobility and better schools. But it's sort of like if one person stands up in favor of something, then the partisan politics kick in. Common Core is a perfect example. It was the product of governors, mainly Republican governors, and now it's bad news, and that's just tragic. So I wonder what it's going to take to break through this partisan stranglehold and embolden or empower leaders. I think of Obama's first election. There was a huge group of independents and moderate Republicans who voted for him in hopes for what he was articulating, and many disappointments. But still, there's a hunger for this courage and boldness, and for America to live up to our better ideals and our higher angels. And how do we break through?
Let me take a stab at that, because I think you're absolutely right. You know, when I first came to Capitol Hill in 1991, and I started working, you know, for John Kasich ultimately, that his best friends were Democrats, and he could hang out with Ron Dellums, and he could hang out with any number of Democrats and Dick Gephardt and agree to disagree, but still they viewed each other as people. And it's harder to disagree or to fight with someone who you know as a person as opposed to those guys. And now I think the system is such that it's either us, meaning my party, versus them, the other party. In order for me to win, you have to lose. And I think the art of compromise and negotiation is vanished on the Hill. And a very senior member of the House Republican leadership told me last week that I thought was discouraging. He said, my caucus is not worried about if we take a tough vote that, you know, their constituents are going to be mad at them. They're worried if my folks in my caucus take a tough vote, they're going to get somebody in the Tea Party to take them out in a primary. And they're focused more on appeasing their political constituencies so they don't come after them, as opposed to doing what's right for the country. And so, yeah, so I think that we as citizens have an obligation of telling these folks this is wrong, and that we didn't elect you to go up there to represent a caucus or represent a cause or represent a party. Yes, you have your partisan affiliation, but you recognize that you represent the American people. And I think that's something a lot of people have forgotten.
I think they've done a great job. I think this has been hopefully fulfilled your mission.